All right, we are on Judges chapter 2, verse 16. And we need to we're moving very quickly through Judges. So would someone please read 16 through the end, which is 23? Should I just
I
pick
will.
Okay, thank you.
The Lord rescues his people. Then the Lord raised up judges to rescue the Israelites from their attackers. Yet Israel did not listen to the judges, but prostituted themselves by worshiping other gods. How quickly they turned away from the path of their ancestors, who had walked in obedience to the Lord's commands. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge over Israel, he was with that judge and rescued the people from their enemies throughout the judge's lifetime. For the Lord took pity on his people, who were burdened by oppression and suffering. But when the judge died, the people returned to their corrupt ways, behaving worse than those who had lived before them. They went after other gods, serving and worshiping them, and they refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. So the Lord burned with anger against Israel. He said, "Because these people have violated my covenant, which I made with their ancestors, and have ignored my commands, I will no longer drive out the nations that Joshua left unconquered when he died. I did this to test Israel, to see whether or not they would follow the ways of the Lord as their ancestors did. That is why the Lord left those nations in place. He did not quickly drive them out or allow Joshua to conquer them all."
Wow. That's a strong word. Mine said hoard. I think yours said prostitute. Hoard after other gods and bow down to them. It's interesting too, because you did this, now I'm going to leave you. I have a little side note here just to give Cindy a break. It says, even at the beginning, the author made it clear that the judges failed to produce lasting change in the people. In fact, the death of a judge seemingly fueled the rebellion of the people. With each successive judge, the people's rebellion continued to escalate. The leadership of the judges functioned to expose the nation to the depravity of their sin and inability to keep God's righteous law. Paul in the New Testament wrote that this is a primary function of the Old Testament law and sacrificial system. It was meant to serve as a guardian, to teach the people what God commands and to show them that they were together unable to obey his law. This inability is meant to cause the people to long for a true and lasting deliverer who will accomplish what the judges could not. Jesus' work provides hope for people who acknowledge their inability to keep God's law and place their faith in his finished work on their behalf. I think it's really interesting too, like how the entire Old Testament points to Jesus. It's like helping the people understand they could not do it on their own. Whenever you're ready, Cindy.
Can you hold on a minute? I got
Go
something
ahead.
here I wanted to share in my Bible. And I think maybe we talked about this a little bit at some point in the past, but it says throughout this period of history, Israel went through 7 cycles of rebelling against God, being overrun by enemy nations, being delivered by God-fearing judge, remaining loyal to God under that judge, and again forgetting God when the judge died. We tend to follow the same cycle, remaining loyal to God as long as we are near those who are devoted to him. But when we are on our own, the pressure to be drawn away from God increases, determined to be faithful to God despite the difficult situations you encounter.
Well,
What are those 7 cycles again?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. What were the 7 cycles?
Well, there were 7 different cycles, but each cycle had 1, rebelling against God.
Rebel. I need to get back to spelling. Rebel against God.
2, being overrun by enemy nations. 3, being delivered by a God-fearing judge. 4, remaining loyal to God under that judge. 5, again, forgetting God when the judge died. So the way that reads to me, those 5 things happened 7 times. There were 7 different times that happened.
Just to show you how important it is to have a godly leader too.
Well, and it's almost like when they were going their 40 years of wandering, you know, as soon as Moses went up on that mountain, they made those calves.
They hoard themselves.
Yeah.
It's a cycle of what, Kathy?
The period of history, Israel, throughout this whole period of history, Israel went through 7 cycles of those 5 things.
So, like I said, the first one was right away, you know, at the promised land. Was there one before that, you think? Let me think. What happened before that?
Yeah, it doesn't say
Deuteronomy.
It doesn't say
It would have been Joshua and then Deuteronomy. Right? Is that what you're asking, Lori?
Yeah, throughout this period of history. So they're not starting with when they left Egypt.
No, well, I don't know, Lori, but I think it's when the judges were put in place.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think it's the judges too. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
yeah, because the judges would have been a period of the history.
Yeah.
Right.
And I will say with the Grow in His Word class, where they really studied, you know, go over all the judges, you know, how many were good judges, how many were bad judges. And that's
Dan
very,
actually gave me his paper here about that. I will look at it then. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but he gave me a copy out of the growth class.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Cindy.
No, that's fine. John only does verse 16 out of that.
Wow.
2:16, the Lord raised up judges. A judge or deliverer was distinct from a judge in the English world today. Such a leader guided military expeditions against foes and arbitrated judicial matters. There was no succession or national rule. They were local deliverers, lifted up to leadership by God when the deplorable condition of Israel and the region around them prompted God to rescue the people.
So they led the military and
they arbitrated judicial issues.
Kathy, whenever you're ready.
Okay. They failed to learn what the Lord did. verses 16 to 23. Whenever Israel turned away from the Lord to worship idols, he chastened them severely, and when in their misery they turned back to him. He liberated them, but just as soon as they were free and their situation was comfortable again, Israel went right back into the same old sins. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of, is the often repeated statement that records the sad cyclic, I'm not sure how you say this, cyclical nature of Israel's sins. And then it has chapter 3, verses 7 to 8, and also 12, and then chapter 4, chapter 6, chapter 10, and chapter 13 referenced. The people wasted their suffering. They didn't learn the lessons God wanted them to learn and profit from his chastening. God delivered his people by raising up judges who defeated the enemy and set Israel free. The Hebrew word translated judge means to save, to rescue. The judges were deliverers who won great military victories with the help of the Lord, but the judges were also leaders who helped the people settle their disputes. The judges came from different tribes and functioned locally rather than nationally, and in some cases their terms of office overlapped. The word judge is applied to only 8 of the 12 people we commonly call judges, but all of them functioned as counselors and deliverers. The 8 men are Othniel, Tola, Jer, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and Samson.
So they all were actual judges and the other ones were what?
See what that says here. The word judge is applied to only 8 of the 12 people we commonly call judges, but all of them functioned as counselors and deliverers. It doesn't really say what the others.
They functioned as counselors and deliverers, even though they weren't actually called judges.
That's kind of the way I read it.
Doesn't make sense to me because they were doing the job. So
yeah. The cycles of disobedience, discipline, despair, and deliverance is seen today whenever God's people turn away from his word and go on their way. If disobedience isn't followed by divine discipline, then the person is not truly a child of God, for God chastens all of his children. Hebrews 12, 3-13. God has great compassion for his people, but he is angry at their sins. The book of Judges is the inspired record of Israel's failures and God's faithfulness. But if we study this book only as past history, we miss the message completely. This book is about God's people today. When the psalmist reviewed the period of the judges in Psalms 106, 40-46, he concluded with a prayer that we need to pray today. Save us, O Lord our God, and gather us from the nations that we may give thanks to your holy name and glory in your praise. Psalm 106, 47. That's it.
wow. All right, Tony says, verses 16-19. These verses provide a summary of the book of Judges. Israel sinfully departed from the Lord. Their enemies oppressed them. The Lord felt sorry for them when they cried for help. He raised up a deliverer. The deliverer defeated their enemies. The deliverer died, and then Israel returned to their idols. Every time this cycle repeated, the people grew more wicked. 20-23. During the years covered in the book of Joshua, God drove out the Canaanites, opened doors, and made things happen. But in this era of Israel's history, God said, because this nation has violated my covenant and that I made with their fathers and disobeyed me, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left when he died. Here we get some insight into God's mysterious ways. He said that he would leave Israel a problem, some Canaanites within their borders, specifically to test Israel in verse 22. Did it say that in 22? In order to test. Yes, it does. A test is a negative reality that God allows in your life so that you can see how serious or lacking your spiritual devotion to him is. God already knows.
I want to write that down. A
Okay.
test. Hold on.
Yep. Tell me when you're ready.
Go ahead. A test.
A test is a negative reality
Uh-huh.
that God allows
Uh-huh.
in your life
Okay.
so that you can see
Mm-hmm.
how serious or lacking,
Or lacking.
yeah, how serious or lacking
Mm-hmm.
your spiritual devotion to him is.
I like that.
Yeah. It goes on to say
Spiritual devotion to.
him is.
Thank you.
Yep. A test is a negative reality that God allows in your life so that you can see how serious or lacking your spiritual devotion to him is. God already knows how you'll respond to such tests. He is not shocked by your reaction, but he uses a test to validate or invalidate your commitment. A divine test, then, is a blessing because it enables you to know the strength of your commitment to the Lord.
Okay, say that again.
Yep. A divine test, then, comma, a divine test, comma, then, comma,
Mm-hmm.
is a blessing
Mm-hmm.
because it enables you
Mm-hmm.
to know the strength
Mm-hmm.
of your commitment
Mm-hmm.
to the Lord.
I missed the last sentence. It
Yeah.
is a blessing because it allows you to know.
Yeah. So a divine test then is a blessing because it enables you to know the strength of your commitment to the Lord.
I'm going to send that to Nicole.
Mm.
Mm.
The next line is interesting to me. But how will you respond? But how will you respond should you learn that your commitment was merely a house of cards? It's interesting. So when the Lord tries to teach me something, there's terminology that will come up constantly around whatever. Just this morning in that book that Dawn is reading, Is It Me? He was talking about how, like, as churches and in families, we have this house of cards, and everyone has to stay in their place and do their part of the dysfunction so the house of cards stands up. But when you pull your card out and you say, I'm not going to play this anymore, and I'm not going to walk on eggshells, and I'm not going to participate in this, that you mess up the house of cards. And it's interesting that this is coming up here too. Learn that your commitment was merely a house of cards. I would think that that might be like someone who like thinks that they're okay because they're doing all the right things, but like it isn't really, their heart's not really changed. Maybe.
That sounds a lot like Stan's sermon yesterday, I think.
I have to go back to my brain to remember what his sermon was. Which part of it?
What part was it? He said so much. Well, I guess it all comes back to living the Christian life. Don't be a fake. You want
Yeah.
to be a Christian, live the Christian life.
Yeah.
Is that what you got out of the sermon, Kathy? And what was that other word he used? Oh, attitude, but we won't go there.
All right, that took us through the end of 2. My next section goes 3, 1 through 6. Would someone like to read?
I can read it.
Go ahead. Thank you, Kathy.
These are the nations the Lord left to test all those Israelites who had not experienced any of the wars in Canaan. He did this only to teach warfare to the descendants of the Israelites who had not had previous battle experience. The 5 rulers of the Philistines, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites living in the Lebanon mountains from Mount Baal Hermon to Lebo Hamath. They were left to test the Israelites to see whether they would obey the Lord's commands, which he had given their forefathers through Moses. The Israelites lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They took their daughters in marriage and gave their own daughters to their sons and served their gods.
Dun, dun, dun. That's interesting. It was to test them that they might know war and teach war. What's John got, Cindy?
Not much. You read through verse 7?
6.
Verse 6.
Okay, he has a little thing on verse 1 and verse 6. Verse 1. Hold on. The purpose was to use them to test and discipline the sinful Israelites, as well to aid the young in learning the art of war. 3:6. The Israelites failed God's test, being enticed into 1, marriages with the Canaanites, and 2, worship of their gods. Disobedience was repeated frequently throughout the centuries and led God to use the Assyrians and Babylonians to expel them from the land gained here. That's it with John.
Kathy, what do you got?
The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. That statement could have been made by a space alien in a sci-fi novel, but it wasn't. The Apostle Paul wrote those words to the believers in Corinth, reminding them of the very principle every Christian needs to take heart. When God goes to war, he usually chooses the most unlikely soldiers, hands them the most unusual weapons, and accomplishes through them the most unpredictable results. And then we're going to go to Othniel, the power of God. In
Okay,
this chapter,
that's 7, or is that going to verse 7?
no, that was just kind of a little bit of an overview.
Okay.
And now it's going to go into the actual chapter 3.
Okay.
In this chapter, you will find 5 lords of the Philistines in verse 3, and the king of Moab called Lord in verse 25. But more importantly, the Lord, quotations, the Lord, meaning Jehovah God, is named 15 times in these 30 verses. That lets us know who is really in charge.
So So who were the five lords? I don't know that I got that. Or doesn't it matter?
I don't know that it matters at this point. Just says in this chapter, chapter 3.
Okay. Oh, maybe it's Othniel, Ehud. Nope.
Yeah, it might be.
No, there's only three of them. They're judges, I guess. Guess
Well,
we'll
maybe
find
it'll
out.
say here because it's talking about Othniel now. God's mercy toward his people. This is verses 1 to 4. The tribe of Judah was not able to hold on to the key Philistine cities they had taken. And as we saw in chapter 1, the other tribes failed to conquer the Canaanite nations. These surviving nations adopted a good neighbor policy toward Israel that eventually defeated Israel from within. Sometimes Satan comes as a lion to devour, but often he comes as a serpent to deceive. References to 1 Peter and 2 Corinthians. God could have judged Israel for sparing the wicked Canaanite nations, but in his mercy, he spared them because he had purposes for them to fulfill. Israel had committed a serious blunder in not trusting God to give them victory, but God sought to use their mistake for their own good. Romans 8:28 worked even in Old Testament days. How would he use? He would use. Hang on. Sorry. He would use the enemy to train Israel to help the new generation learn the meaning of war. Judges 3:1-2. Life had been relatively easy for the Jews in the Promised Land, and they needed the challenge of ever-present danger to keep them alert and disciplined. This is not to say God always approves of war or that participating in conflict always builds character. Combat experience might do just the opposite. The point is that the Jews had to keep some kind of standing army, or their enemies could quickly unite and overpower them, especially when Israel was at such a low ebb spiritually. In the years to come, both Saul and David would need effective armies in order to overcome their many enemies and establish the kingdom. God also used the Canaanite nation to test Israel and reveal whether or not his people would obey the regulations Moses had given them from the Lord. God had made it very clear to the Jews that they were not to study comparative religion and get interested in the pagan practices of the Canaanites. That's found in Deuteronomy 7. It was that kind of curiosity that had brought divine judgment on Israel in the land of Moab.
To give an address in 7. I'm sorry.
7:1-11.
Thank you.
It was that kind of curiosity that had brought divine judgment on Israel in the land of Moab, because curiosity is often the first step toward conformity. Of course, Israel should have been a witness to the surviving pagan nations and sought to win them to faith in the true and living God, but they failed in their responsibility as well. What a difference it would have made in the subsequent national history if the Jews had won the Canaanites to the Lord instead of the Canaanites winning Jews to Baal.
I love that curiosity is the first step to conformity.
Yeah, I just wrote that down.
And that's it.
I like the part about the good neighbor policy.
Yeah.